Greetings, dear friends. Welcome to this live stream for Empty Cloud Monastery, New Jersey. I'd like to begin as usual by paying homage to our teacher, the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Itipiso bhagava arahan samma sambuddho. Vijacharana sambhano sugato lokavidu anuttaro purisa dhammasarati sattadeva manusana buddho bhagavati. So today I've chosen the topic of speaking praise of the Buddha. The Buddha, our teacher. It's so uplifting and helpful to focus our attention and consider the qualities of the Buddha, consider our teacher. And I feel very humble speaking about the Buddha, a sense of who are we to cast our gaze in that direction. And yet the Buddha himself encouraged us to do so. There's such an encouragement for us to remember the qualities of our teacher, to gain inspiration, to gain a sense of uplift, to give us joy in our practice. Because when we have this positive state of mind, then we find it so much easier to tackle dukkha, the causes of dukkha. We find it so much easier to meditate, to be with ourselves, to be present, and to make progress on the path. And so Buddhanusati, recollection of the Buddha, is a recommended way of practice, and it's a contemplation to bring in when we feel perhaps bogged down with negativity, a bit lost. Perhaps we're struggling with life situations that are really challenging. At such times, friends, when we're depressed, down, when we're feeling despair, then it really is skillful means to lift ourselves up. And Buddhanusati is a way in which we can quite reliably do so. So just to consider the Lord Buddha, this being, this human being, who is the reason we're here, having this conversation, sharing on Dhamma today, the reason that we've come together, the reason that I'm wearing the robes I'm wearing, the reason that we're following the precepts we're following. You know, the guidance of the Buddha, for most of us, imbues our entire existence. And the inspiration of his teachings is our life's path for many of us. And the Buddha himself, you know, was in his time when he was actually a living human being, 2,500 years ago, was greatly revered by so many people, thousands and thousands of people all across northern India. What's now northern India, what in those days was many different countries, many different nations with many different languages and cultures. And he walked from place to place, from country to country, following the customs of those people in those places, speaking to them in ways they could understand, and meeting each and every person with an understanding, a depth of understanding of their situation and their potential for liberation. So he would teach in such a way as to lead on each and every being who he was in contact with. And he was widely revered. He was recognized. Fortunately, the Buddha came into being at a time when there was a lot of spiritual practitioners. There was a lot of interest in the great spiritual questions and practices. And there was a degree of civilization, a great degree, really. There were countries with democracies. There were many nations living peaceably together, in a wider community. There were wars, there was strife. I mentioned last week, even the Buddha's own peoples, his mother's people and his father's people, fought one another. But there were conducive conditions for people to hear the Dharma, to be able to have time, energy, resources, so that they could attend meetings with the Buddha and hear his teachings. And so there was a great receptivity, particularly at the beginning of the Buddha's ministry, when he became the Buddha. It's as if we're, in a way, told that there were many people who were ready to receive the Dharma. They had, just as the Buddha, we're told, spent countless lifetimes developing his good qualities in order to become the Bodhisattva, who would then go on to become the Buddha. In order to develop enough parami, merits, enough wisdom, enough insight to even begin to approach this project of liberation through his own effort, his own understanding. The Buddha spent countless lifetimes, and in all those lifetimes he was connecting with other beings, and those beings who were around at the time that the Buddha became the Buddha and who came into contact with him initially were so ready and so open to his teachings that the sense is that they had been also preparing for many lifetimes for this opportunity. The Jataka tales full of stories of such beings and these processes. And so when the Buddha became the Buddha, it's as if we're even told that the entire world systems, 10,000 world systems were shaken, were moved, were illuminated when the Buddha became the Buddha. This awakening, the Great Awakening, had reverberations throughout all the realms of existence in all the universes. So the gist of this, the sense we can glean from these kind of announcements, these kind of teachings, is that when the Buddha became the Buddha, this was a momentous event. It was a transformative event. It was an opening for all beings to have this opportunity to develop spiritually, to find their way to liberation through the teachings of this great master. And so many beings were ready when the Buddha started teaching. And we know that many of us will know the trajectory of his first months and perhaps years while he was still relatively young, in his late 30s. The Buddha started teaching. And of course, as many of us know, he taught, first of all, the people who'd been his companions early on in his striving. He was practicing a lot of asceticism. He had 5 companions who practiced alongside him. And when he became the Buddha, he found them, searched them out, walked to where they were in Sarnath, and he gave teachings to them. And they very quickly understood what he was conveying, the beautiful Dhamma, and they too became fully liberated. They became arahants. And from these 5 companions, he then met various groups, from the small numbers of people to 1,000 fire worshipping ascetics living in Gaia, on the hill in Gaia. 1,000 serious practitioners who heard his teachings, all became his disciples on the spot, and all became fully liberated. So there was this kind of cascade effect, this extraordinary illumination in that place at that time of so many hearts and minds, following on from the Buddha's enlightenment. Later on in the Buddha's life, in his ministry, and he was teaching, of course, until he was 80 years old, right up until the moment he passed away in Kushinagar. All those years, those 45 years, the Buddha was tirelessly teaching. And later on, in his middle years and old age, he met all sorts of different people who, some, were ready to receive the teachings from him. Others were less receptive. He even had to deal with hostility. He often had to deal with people who were mildly or even overtly disrespectful towards him, who simply did not see this person. They couldn't recognize what was before them. The Buddha even had threats to his life, and he was slandered. He was spoken of in public in really disrespectful ways. And through all of this, less obvious and easeful teaching, the Buddha maintained equanimity, maintained his peace, was unruffled, unshaken in every situation. So it's very amazing to take in, as we consider the life of the Buddha, his magnificent, unbroken energy of conveying the Dharma to whomever, wherever, however possible. I could go on and on, but what I'm going to do is to focus on a couple of suttas in the Majjhima, which are really inspiring examples of those who could recognize the Buddha. Now, the Buddha had a number of conversations with Brahmins, the kind of spiritual caste, the class of people who were priestly, who were revered in the societies as the religious ones, the learned ones, the ones who understood the way things are, who knew the Vedas, all the spiritual teachings of the day. The Buddha had many conversations with Brahmins, and oftentimes they would be objecting to his teachings, trying to find fault with his teachings and to refute them and to embarrass and shame the Buddha in public. It never worked. That was never possible. And generally, those who came to argue with the Buddha would quite quickly turn around and become his disciples if they had any intelligence. Very few were the cases of people who simply couldn't appreciate the Dhamma. But there were one or two. But in these two suttas I want to speak about today, we have the examples of spiritual practitioners, Brahmins, who immediately recognized the exceptionality of the Buddha, the incredible opportunity, good fortune, privilege they had, that they were actually able to come into contact with the Buddha in their very lifetime, that there was a Buddha in the world in their day, in their time. What good fortune, how amazing. People who realize this. And so I'd like to share with you, first of all, we'll look at Majjhima 91. It's called Brahmayu Sutta. Brahmayu was a very elderly Brahmin. We're told he was 120 years old, a very revered community member, teacher of many, and held in the highest esteem in his place where he lived. And the Buddha came along eventually to this place called Mithila. But before the Buddha visited Mithila, Brahmayu heard about him, even while he was far away. And as soon as Brahmayu heard about the Buddha, the good report that was spread around about this person, the greatest of teachers, spiritual teachers, he was elated, he was delighted, and he wanted to find out more about him. He was old, he was infirm, and so he couldn't travel to the Buddha, to where the Buddha was, but he sent one of his students called Uttara and asked him to spend time with this great teacher and to then come back and give a report of him. And in the spiritual texts of the day, there are many verses and teachings and passages about the marks of a great being, the qualities, physical qualities of a great person. And so Brahmayu asked Uttara to look out for these physical qualities and to see what else he could discover about this great teacher. And so Uttara made his way to where the Buddha was. And he followed him like a shadow, we're told, for 7 months before returning back to Mithila to report to Brahmayu. And it's just beautiful to read in this sutta how Uttara came back and explained and described the qualities of the Buddha. And he said, indeed, this being has all the marks of a great person. And I won't go into all the details of the 32 marks of a great man, but I will say the sense that these attributes, these physical qualities has, is of a person who is upright, who is physically well proportioned, of great beauty, of great grace, a person who has a radiance, who is in all their physical attributes healthy and relaxed, you could say supremely relaxed and at ease. And the Buddha made sure that Uttara could see that he had all of these physical attributes, and Uttara, following the Buddha like a shadow, watched how he moved, his posture, the way he ate, the way he cleaned up after eating, the way he meditated, the way he related to lay people and monastics around him. And the impression that Uttara gave to Brahmayu was of a person who was always peaceful, always poised, never hurried, not too slow, not too fast. Everything he did was done with mindfulness, with care. He had no ways in which he displayed any kind of nervous body energy, no fidgeting, no extraneous movement. everything about his posture and his behavior physically gave the sense of great tranquility, great peace, great easefulness. And then his speech, Uttara described as mellifluous, harmonious, delightful to hear, measured. He would speak just loudly enough that the people around him could hear him well, but that his voice didn't carry beyond the assembly. And the words that he spoke were beneficial, wise, to the point, on Dharma, and he didn't, Uttara never witnessed the Buddha praising anyone or berating anyone. He didn't personalize the Dharma teachings. He just spoke on suffering and the way out of suffering. Brahmayu, again, if you read this sutta, Majjhima 91, it's beautiful to read actually the praises or the descriptions of the attributes of the Buddha through the eyes of the student Uttara. When Brahmayu heard what Uttara had to say, he was overjoyed that such a person existed in the world, a Samma Sambuddha, an enlightened one, enlightened through his own efforts and his own wisdom. He arranged his clothing in a respectful way. He put his hands together, and then Brahmayu praised the Buddha out loud and expressed his wish that he would one day have the chance to meet such a being. And so, yes, later on, the Buddha came to Mithila with a whole group of monastics, and Brahmayu had his chance to come and see the Buddha. Being a very respected elder himself, he had his visit announced in advance. The Buddha gave a welcome to him in public, and then Brahmayu came along. And of course, all the people who were sitting around the Buddha, great crowd of local people were there when Brahmayu came to see the Buddha. And they all made way for him, and he went and he sat right next to the Buddha. And he addressed the Buddha in verses, and he asked the Buddha about how one can be a holy person, a saintly person, how one can be a Buddha, how one can aspire to Nibbana, realization of Nibbana in the future. And this was really an invitation for the Buddha to express himself directly. And I'd like to share with you what the Buddha said. He said, in answer to Brahmayu's question, one who knows their past lives, sees heaven and places of loss, and has attained the end of rebirth, such a sage has perfect insight. They know their mind is pure, completely freed from greed. They've given up birth and death and have completed the spiritual journey, gone beyond all things. Such a one is declared to be awakened. So these pithy verses expressing what it is to be awakened, Brahmayu immediately understood. This is a Buddha speaking from experience, and he again paid homage to the Buddha. In the midst of this assembly, in this public place, he got down on his knees and he started kissing the feet of the Buddha, kissing and caressing his feet. People were amazed because this elderly, aged, highly respected Brahmin had never behaved like this before towards anyone else, but they understood And we can all understand that Brahmayu made the most of the opportunity that he had. He wasn't missing out. His mind wasn't clouded. He could see where he was, who he was with, and what this incredible blessing, what opportunity it gave him to pay homage to the Buddha in person. And so he did. And the Buddha invited him to get up and sit back next to him. And knowing that the heart of Brahmayu was wide open to the teachings, the Buddha gave him the teachings. And of course, everyone else who would have been present would also have been able to receive the teachings from the Buddha in this way. And so he gave the as we're told often in the suttas, friends, when the Buddha found receptivity, openness, the ability to hear the Dhamma, he would always give these teachings. He would give a talk on giving, on ethical conduct, and on heaven. He explained the drawbacks of sensual pleasures, so sordid and corrupt, and the benefit of renunciation. And then, after Brahmayu had heard all of this, his mind was ready, pliable, open to the essential teachings of a Buddha. Then the Buddha spoke about suffering, the cause of suffering, the way out of suffering, the Eightfold Path. Brahmayu, of course, understood what the Buddha was saying immediately. He was so primed and ready for the Buddha's teachings. And elated, he went away and practiced after having paid homage to the Buddha again and having announced his discipleship, that he's a lay follower of the Buddha for life. And so this beautiful meeting, someone who could make the most of and fully appreciate the moment, is something really for us to consider. Can we meet the Buddha, friends? Can we be ready for this moment? We have the opportunity to meet the Buddha here and now. Can we do that? Can we consider the qualities of the Buddha? And in this way, allow our hearts to be touched by the Buddha, by the one who's awake. And when we incline our energy in this way, we are inviting ourselves, to follow and to develop and to give energy to practice in order to attain the same enlightenment that the Buddha attained, the freedom from greed, hatred, and delusion. Can we do this? Can we make this our life? Can we make this our mission? Something to consider. Of course, we can't meet the Buddha in this lifetime. And yet, as the Buddha himself said, if you want to be close to me, being physically close to me is quite insignificant. What's really close to the Buddha is to practice the Buddha's teachings. Fortunate Brahmayu had the opportunity both to be physically close to the Buddha and also to hear, receive and understand his teachings and to put those teachings into practice. Well, the Buddha left Mithila soon after. Brahmayu offered dharana, offered food to the Sangha. Then the Buddha set off and carried on his wandering the north Gangetic plains, teaching the multitudes. Brahmayu never saw him again, but Brahmayu continued to practice. And soon after, he passed away. People asked the Buddha after Brahmayu's passing, what was his destination? And the Buddha declared that Brahmayu had become a non-returner, an anagami, very close to liberation in his lifetime, and surely, inevitably, heading in the next life toward Nibbana. Majjhima 91 is followed naturally by Majjhima 92, which is another very uplifting sutta where another Brahmin called Sela meets the Buddha. Sela Sutta is the name of this sutta. And it really is, these two for me are very similar in a way, in this sense of coming across people at the time of the Buddha who were so ready to receive him and to make the most of the moment that they had with him. In Sela Sutta, we actually learn about a ascetic with dreadlocks, so a serious practitioner who had left the household life and was practicing asceticism. His name was Kenya, and Kenya heard that the Buddha was coming to visit their area, a place called Apana. Oh, and as soon as Kenya heard about the Buddha's arrival, along with 1,250 monastics, so a huge group of monastics wandering around at this point together, came to Apana, and immediately Kenya went to the Buddha, paid respects to him, and invited the entire Sangha for the next day's meal. What an opportunity, what a chance he had to make merit, and he knew it, friends. And so he went back to his hermitage and he rallied all the friends, relations, fellow practitioners to help to prepare a meal for 1,250 people. When Kenya made his invitation to the Buddha said, Kenya, there are 1,250 monastics with me. It may be that this is not necessary for you to go to this great length of inviting everyone assembled here with me for the meal. And Kenya said, no, I'd like to invite you all. And 3 times the Buddha gave him the opportunity to reflect and maybe step back. And Kenya determinedly announced that he was inviting everyone in the Sangha, monastic Sangha, to the meal. And so he did. And Sela, who this sutta is named for, was a Brahmin in Apana, and he was a friend of Kenya. Indeed, Kenya was a kind of follower of Sela. Sela was a great teacher, a kind of priest, a Brahmin of renown. And Sela came to Kenya's hermitage and he asked him, my goodness, what's happening? This is the day before the meal, and there were fires being lit and great pots of food being prepared and huge numbers of people scurrying around, working to enable this meal to take place. And Sela wondered if it was a wedding, huge wedding they were preparing for, whether one of Kenya's children was getting married, or whether indeed the king, King Bimbisara, the local king, was coming for a meal. And Kenya explained, this is the Buddha. The Buddha has come with 1,250 disciples. I'm offering them the alms food for the day tomorrow. And again, just like Kenya, Sela, when he heard the Buddha had come to town, was delighted, elated, and he brought his 300 disciples, his own students, to come and meet the Buddha. And he addressed the Buddha in public and asked him questions, praised the Buddha, gave verses extolling the qualities of a Buddha that he knew from the Brahminical teachings, the great person, the marks of a great being and the qualities of a great being. And he spoke to the Buddha in such a way that he was asking the Buddha, are you such a being? Are you really such a being come into the world? And the Buddha responded, and I'd like to share what the Buddha said here also to Sela. He said, I am a great being, Sela. I am the unexcelled king of Dhamma. By Dhamma, I roll forth the wheel that cannot be turned back. By me is the wheel rolled forth, the unexcelled wheel of Dhamma. And Sariputta keeps the wheel of Dhamma rolling after me. What should be known is known. What should be developed has been developed. What should be abandoned, I have abandoned. That, Brahmin, is why I am awakened. Dispel doubts in me. Have confidence, Brahmin. This sight is hard to find, for Buddhas arise only rarely. That which is hard to find in the world, manifesting only rarely, I, Brahmin, am awakened, the unexcelled surgeon. So this, of course, is a translation of these beautiful verses. When the Buddha finished like this, he said, I am supreme, I am incomparable, crusher of Mara's armies. Having subjugated all my enemies, I rejoice, afraid of nothing. So a great sort of cry of victory from the Buddha in response to Sela's very open appreciation of the possibility of who he might be. And so he announces himself in this way. And of course, the armies of Mara and the enemies that have been subjugated by the Buddha are delusion, illusion, ignorance, all the flavors of desire, and you could say covetousness, all the flavors of aversion, hatred, anger, ill will. These armies, these enemies, vanquished entirely by the Buddha. And of course, Sela, hearing this declaration of the Buddha's nature, the Buddha's experience, the Buddha's being in the world, was completely overwhelmed with happiness and very deeply affected. And he immediately, without any hesitation, declared that he was going forth as a monastic disciple of the Buddha. And it's really amazing to take this in, because here was a man who was a great leader in his own community, highly revered teacher himself, with 300 disciples who all looked to him for their spiritual guidance. And immediately he became a disciple of the Buddha, became a monk. And he asked his disciples, he said to them, this is clearly the best way forward. Having met the Buddha, please feel free to also become disciples of the Buddha if you would like to do so. And all 300 of his disciples, on the spot, without hesitation, also declared their wish to go forth and practice as monastics under the Buddha. So this remarkable visitation to Apana, these people who were ready to receive the Buddha, to make merit, to support the Sangha, and to follow the teachings of the Buddha. And we're told that Kenya, the dreadlocked ascetic, fed, the next day, 1,250 plus 301 monastics. And after 8 days, Sela and the 300 disciples, his previous disciples, the 301 new monastics, all became arahants. So these two suttas are really uplifting, and we can take great heart from them and consider how it is that some beings are open and eager to be transformed, to be changed, to be touched by the arrival of a Buddha. And other beings are not so open and ripe and ready to hear the Buddha Dhamma, what it is that makes the difference, and how we can enable ourselves to stay open, stay clear, be uncluttered, not allow ourselves to get bogged down in habits, in defilements, in distractions, but to have the same degree of appreciation, enthusiasm, and readiness to take up the Buddha Dhamma and make much of it, friends. So, at the beginning of this session, I did the chant, Itipiso, Itipiso Bhagava Arahant Sama Sambuddha. And I'd just like to touch in on the meaning of this chant that many of us know very well. It is the qualities of the Buddha that we recite in morning puja, in evening puja, for the monastics every day, considering the qualities of the Buddha, also the Dhamma and the Sangha. We do this because it reminds us to consider and reflect on the triple gem, the three blessings that we have, the three refuges that we have as followers of the Buddha. Refuge in the Buddha, refuge in his teachings, or refuge in being awake, refuge in what is true, and the third is the Sangha, the community of practitioners, the Dharma practitioners past, present and future, the goodness, the potential for goodness that we all have, friends. So these refuges we recite every day, and of course the result of this is to lift ourselves up, to remind ourselves of the possibility of following these teachings to the end. And so Buddhanusati, recollection of the Buddha, also recollection of the Dhamma and Sangha, these recollections are to be treasured, to be made much of. Bring them in. As I said at the beginning, whenever there's any doubt or depression or negativity, despair, falling away from the path, this is a time to remember, to consider the qualities of the Buddha. So these qualities, I'm not going to be able to say very much. There's so much we could say and consider here. But for now, I'd like to go through these qualities. Arahant, Itipiso Arahant. Arahant, one who is free from greed, hatred, and delusion, who has pulled out all these defiled mind states at the root, where there is no possibility of them returning, entirely free. One who has broken the fetters, the bonds that bind us. Arahant. The work has been done, the burden has been put down. They have reached the goal of the holy life. There's no more to be done. Arahant, the first of the qualities of the Buddha, and also all those disciples of the Buddha who have become similarly free from suffering. The next quality of the Buddha, Sama Sambuddho, this particularity Only a Buddha is able to, a person who's able to reach the final goal through their own efforts and understanding. And we can consider the journey of the Buddha before he became the Buddha, how difficult, how challenging to try to find teachers and not find anyone who can actually answer the question, how do we find the way out of suffering? And the Buddha had to find it out for himself. And he could only do so because he had the incredible resource of virtue, all the different good qualities that he had amassed over countless lifetimes, that enabled him to have the fortitude, the clarity, the strength, the determination to find his way on his own, you know. The Buddha, having rediscovered the path of practice, we can then receive that from the Buddha. We can be guided. The path has been made. We just need to follow that path. The Buddha was the one who had to find his way through the wilderness to make the path for us to follow. It is a rare event for a Buddha to arise in the world. We will never know another Buddha, because only another Buddha can only arise when the teachings, the influence, the considerable energetic influence that's still manifesting today of Gautama the Buddha, when that has completely gone, died out. The next quality of the Buddha that we chant every day, Vijja Charana Sampanno. This is one who is perfect in conduct and in understanding. Vijja, knowledge, charana, conduct, the way he or she moves and acts, speaks, manifests. In the Buddha, we see perfection. These qualities of the Buddha, all perfected, no possibility of doing anything unskillful, unwholesome, harmful. Every act, every word, every movement of a Buddha is mindfully, carefully, and with goodness manifesting in the world. And isn't it true, friends, when we come across great teachers, we find ourselves watching them, observing the body language as well as the speech, observing the way they live, the way they treat other people, the way they relate to the world. So many aspects we can observe, and good to really watch carefully those we revere, those we trust as teachers, and to notice how their every action, their every word is imbued with wisdom, mindfulness, care. And if it isn't, then we can observe that with great compassion and recognize, there's a little more work to be done, perhaps. With great humility, we can see so easily when that may be the case for another. And we can trust that others may see, in our case, the blind spots that we may not see. And may they, with compassion, support us in overcoming those blind spots, those challenges. But in the case of a Buddha or a great teacher, one who is fully enlightened, fully liberated, free from suffering, we can see that there's a seamlessness to the peaceful, pure-hearted beauty of their manifesting in the world. Buddha had perfection of knowledge as well as conduct. The perfection of knowledge the Buddha had was his ability to know the past of trajectory, not only of this being that he was, but also of all beings, to see the fullness of karma, action and reaction, the law of cause and effect playing out in the world. He had this ability. He also had the ability to see and hear far, far distant. He had the ability to manifest in all the different planes of existence, or virtually all, in order to teach other beings. He was a teacher of gods and humans. But I'm jumping the gun. That's another quality of the Buddha that we'll come to in this chant. Just to mention, in his perfection of knowledge here, the Buddha had self-declared. He declared in Majjhima 10, I think it is, the Lion's Roar Sutta, he declared his 10 powers, his 10 great knowledges, the ability to know all that's possible and that's not possible in the world, to really fully understand the workings of karma in every aspect, in every situation, for everybody. He could, of course, because of that, see the inclinations of beings. And so when he was teaching, he could address the needs of each and every person fully. He was the sublime teacher, the supreme teacher, the person who was capable of teaching anyone, anywhere. The next quality in the chant that we come to is sugato. I love this word. Sugato means well gone. Actually, the Buddha described himself not as the Buddha very often, not as Bhagawa, the Blessed One, which is the way that other people most often addressed him, as Bhagawa, the Blessed One, the Holy One. The Buddha addressed, when he spoke of himself, he described himself as Tathagata. Tathagata, like Sugato. Sugato, well gone. Tathagata, thus come, thus gone. This is a profound contemplation for us to consider how the Buddha described himself. Thus come, thus gone. And here in the recollection of the Buddha that we chant every day, Sugato, the well gone. It's translated variously as the accomplished one, but actually the meaning is the one who's well gone. This reminder for us of the truth of anatta, not self. The Buddha knew that truth, lived that truth to the end. There's nobody there. There's no agenda. There's no personal anything. There's no story. And so the Buddha is the one who is well gone, the one who is thus come, thus gone. The next epithet for the Buddha in this chant is Lokavidu, the knower of the worlds. As I've touched upon, the Buddha could visit beings in all the different planes of existence. He taught the gods, he taught the devas, or the beings in angelic realms. He could teach beings in every realm. And he knew the different worlds. He could go to the highest realms and teach the gods whose minds are so much vaster than the human mind could imagine. Omniscient beings, beings who live for enormous eons of lifetimes. And yet the Buddha had something to teach them, which was that they were still, despite their great advantages as godlike beings, as gods, as higher beings, despite those advantages, they were still subject to the laws of karma, still bound up on the wheel of samsara, of becoming, of birth and death. Only a Buddha could teach such beings, one free from samsara, one no longer caught up in birth and rebirth. And so the Buddha visited the gods regularly and tried to wake them up, helped them to come onto the path of practice with great success. The next epithet of the Buddha, Anuttaro Purisadhamma Sarati, the incomparable leader of people to be tamed, the trainer of people. The Buddha often gave similes, comparing his disciples to like a young thoroughbred colt or an elephant, animals who need training in order to function in the human realm along with human beings. And nowadays we can feel a little bit squeamish about some of the similes around training animals to make them to sort of break their will and to make them behave as we would like them to behave. But we can take the meaning here that we are wild until we start to practice. And isn't it the case, many of us will recognize the wild mind when we try to meditate initially, and the mind is jumping around like a wild monkey from branch to branch. So the Buddha was the tamer of those who wish to be trained. If we want to become masterful, if we want to have agency, to have autonomy here, rather than being led by the wild mind, then we invite this training. We long for this training. We beg for this training. And the Buddha was the one who could train and tame human beings, all persons who wish to be trained. The incomparable leader, having tamed and trained himself. He had the miracle of instruction. As I said, he was the one who could teach anyone. And the next epithet of the Buddha, Satta Dewa Manusanang, teacher of gods and humans. He taught, of course, his own mother when she was in the Tusita realm. What story goes, he spent 3 months there, dwelling in the Tusita realm, teaching the Abhidharma. Whatever we think of these stories and all these different planes of existence, whether we have any sense of connecting with that or not, doesn't matter. The point is that we can accept that the Buddha's teachings are here for everyone. And we can find, if we look at the extensive Pali Canon, from the earliest to maybe some slightly less core teachings of the Buddha, there's enough material there that we can really get a sense of the broadness of the Buddha's teachings and find the teachings that speak to you. There's something there for everyone. We can really take on board that the Buddha was capable of teaching anyone, anywhere, in any situation, and find the way to connect with these teachings. And finally, the 2 last epithets of the Buddha, Buddho Bhagawa. Buddho, awake, the one who woke up, the one who is awake. The teachings from that place for us to wake up ourselves. Bhagawa, the Blessed One. This was a common kind of, and still is in India, a kind of title for a great spiritual teacher, the Blessed One, the Holy One, the Sublime One. Words, of course, friends, cannot meet this person who was the Sammasambuddha, who lived not so very long ago, whose teachings are still available for us today, whose teachings are still rippling forth, radiating forth from the moment that he became the Buddha under the Bodhi tree at Bodh Gaya. Words cannot meet this event and this person, but we can incline our hearts towards consideration of these qualities, consideration of our teacher, and allow ourselves to be uplifted, enthused, allow our hearts to brighten and continue our practice, following in his footsteps as best we can. Ayya. Thank you for your patient listening. I realise I've talked a bit more than usual today. Seriously, I could just go on and on. There is no end to the teachings regarding the Buddha, both the Buddha himself speaking from his perspective as a Buddha, and also people speaking about the Buddha. But I now have a little tiny bit of time to look at your comments. And thank you, everybody, for your greetings. I'm so sorry if I'm not very easy to hear. I really hope you could follow this. I should check next time the chat to find out and to try and do something about the volume. Not that I'm quite sure what to do, but I would try and look into it for next time. Madeline's asking, will we meet Maitreya? I think I kind of answered that probably not. In this lifetime, Madeline. He would have the same qualities as Gautama the Buddha. The Buddhas all have the very same qualities, I believe. This is a weekly Dharma talk, Eric. Yeah. Please check in with BuddhistInsights.org or Empty Cloud Monastery website. There are many other teachings every week scheduled, so do have a look. Thank you so much, everyone. One more question. How perfect. From Mr. Thank you, Mr. Where is the Buddha now? Is he gone completely and non-existent now? That is a wonderful question. The Buddha was often asked the question in his very lifetime, what happens to the Buddha after death? And he would say that's not quite the right question. Where does the Buddha go after death? It's like a candle, a flame that's burning dependent on the wax. We're like a candle burning dependent on the body. And when the wax runs out, the flame goes out. You say, where does that flame go? I leave that with you. Thank you for your question. Oh, Sean, the audio issue is at your end. That's good news. I mean, not for you. I'm sorry. I hope it improved for you, but for everyone else. And finally, Kit, I'll just show your comment, Kit. Thank you. Kit says, the Buddha giving him 3 chances to not have to cook for 1,250. Yeah. Absolutely. You can just imagine, can't you, the hive of activity. But what a beautiful, beautiful teaching for me. How Kenya wanted to do anything and everything he could to make the most of this opportunity. That speaks volumes, doesn't it? And it's such an encouragement to be open, friends, to really make the most of this human life. The opportunity it gives us to practice for liberation. It is amazing. It is wonderful. And it is such a precious gift. We don't know how long it lasts. So we have to make the most of every moment. And also Kenya, when he went to his friends and family and fellow practitioners, how quickly they were ready to rally round and help and support something so wonderful, so good. That's really beautiful too, to reflect on how our enthusiasm for the practice and our good practice and living a virtuous life can also have an effect on others and encourage and inspire others to do their best too. Let's remember that. Awam. So we can finish by paying homage to our teacher, the Buddha, with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, 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 anumodami.